All right, folks. Welcome, everybody, once again to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. I am your host, Mike Frank, here with Jamie Uyeyama, and you just saw our good buddy Greg Flamong there, who is producing the show, and it's Memorial Day. So wanted to say thanks to all the people who have served this country, and certainly to those who uh, did not make it. But just want to say thanks to everybody in that regard. Also, before we get going, I wanted to mention it's a great time to sign up for Irish Sports Daily. You can go to the front page, click on the premium section, and sign up for a subscription. There's lots going on with recruiting that'll be popping up here in the next couple weeks. We have official visits coming up. Lots of things getting ready to roll here. Also, the players will start coming back and back in school for summer school, and they'll be working out that type of stuff. And then we get ready for the season. So if you would, great time to sign up. Go to the front page of Irish Sports Daily, click on the premium section, and sign up today. Also wanted to mention our sponsor, which is ESQ Clothing. ESQ has been making the best handmade custom suits, sport coats, tuxedos, and shirts for the last decade, and has been featured on GQ, ESPN, USA Today, and you've seen them dressing your favorite players and coaches. ESQ only gets the best fabric from Italy and England's top mills. With over 40,000 fabrics to choose from, you're guaranteed to look your best. Go visit esqclothing.com and book your appointment. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Once again, that's esqclothing.com. All right, Yama, there hasn't been a lot that's happened here in the last couple of weeks or last week with recruiting since we last talked. But, we're down to 16 spots or we have 16 spots already filled here. Official visits are coming up. There's a lot of spots that are open. If you're Notre Dame, how do you look at this situation? Because you do have to be responsible as far as the numbers, and you don't know what's really going to happen here with this case that's pending right now. You don't know what's going to happen with this case, and so how do you go about it? Do you oversign? Do you think that that's what Notre Dame should do? Because look, they have a lot of opportunity here with some defensive linemen, right? And we've talked on the show many times about how when you have an opportunity to load up, you want to do that. But you hear some things and some rumblings, and they may be satisfied with 5. I don't think 5's a good. I'd take 6 if I could. I certainly would. And I'm sure there are certain guys that are on the list that are takes no matter what. If you get 5 and Elijah Golden says he wants to come, probably going to take him, depending on what happens at defensive end. I think a guy like Dre Quinn, you gotta take him. I would, there's no way I would let that guy not come to Notre Dame if he wanted to come. So, a lot of people are talking 27, maybe the number. That'd be 11 more spots. I don't know. I just, if I'm Notre Dame, I just take them. And I just worry about it later. If they're good players that you believe in, I think you have to take them. And I know that a lot of Irish fans are uncomfortable with this and uncomfortable with me saying it, because that's not how they've operated in the past. But what has happened in the past is the past. That's not today's modern football. And there are going to be guys who you're just going to have to cut at some point because they're just not giving you what you had hoped for, and you can get a better player. And you're hurting your team, right? I also think you're hurting your team and your team's chances to win a national championship if you just keep guys around just so they can graduate and things like that. I mean, if the goal is to win the national championship, you got to do the smart thing. Now, I also think you have to be respectful of people, and there are a lot of guys who put in a lot of hard work and things like that. But at the end of the day, we know that NIL is here. We know the players are being paid. They understand that with the transfer portal, there's all kinds of things that can happen. And, nobody's spot is guaranteed 4 years of scholarship. So your thoughts here?
I think you got to oversign, and you got to just, it's really not even oversigning these days, like you said, because it's the modern day football and modern day college football. It's just different because of the transfer portal, because of the 105, which it's eventually going to be set in concrete that's that you're going to have that. And yeah, they want to save X amount for walk-ons, but I think you don't turn down good players that aren't going to rock the boat in terms of your like culture by bringing in an extra guy. You might lose somebody else, right? Like as long as you're not doing that and like kind of messing with the room and making it a bad thing. It's why people don't sign like 3 quarterbacks in the class or anything like that. Then you have to approach it that way, just because there's so many things where we can talk about guys getting like cut or whatever. The reality is that there's so many guys that just elect to leave now too. And like Sam Pendleton, he just decides to leave. Like, obviously he was thinking that he wasn't going to start, and he didn't get put in when it was time to play in the playoff. They used Charles Jagasaw instead of him to like step in when Rocco Spindler got hurt, and he probably read the writing on the wall, like, okay, I'm not going to be there. But you have to kind of plan that there's always going to be there's somebody after that kind of guy might leave. So, and even if it's just for practice, because you can't really practice fully if you don't have enough bodies there. You can't run a scout team if you have enough bodies. I think you have to always kind of look at that, especially on the lines where you are always taking as many guys as you can that you think actually have a chance at playing. Because even if some guys don't turn out and playing, even to have some guys as practice players for basically 3 years, because a lot of kids graduate within 3 years, that's not a bad thing. Like, that's a good thing, because it's funny, Mike, when I'm doing, these opponent previews right now, and I'm looking at, a lot of these teams and their rosters and how they're constructed, and you just realize how bad a shape so many of these programs are at certain positions, where they're like, oh my gosh, if they get an injury here, it is just going to be disastrous. And I'm not even talking about like a disastrous, like a starter goes down and there's a next guy. It's like, no, they get one guy goes down. It's like practice is going to be brutal. And I think about where Notre Dame was at receiver, in Marcus Freeman's first year, where they had a couple injuries in camp, and it was, I mean, they couldn't even do anything with the passing game, at that time, yeah. Right? A couple guys pull their hamstrings, it's over. And think about where they were at defensive tackle in like 2014, 2017. You just can't afford to be like that anymore, especially if you're not competing for national championships. But just in general, you shouldn't be that way. So I just look at you always have to be aggressive. You have to try to get as many guys on the roster as possible that you think can play. And the other thing is that almost every one of these guys is going to land on their feet somewhere. Yeah. Because Purdue, as bad as Purdue was, they're 1-11, the worst Power 4 team in the country last year. They had half their guys ended up at like other Power 4 schools. And some of those guys are good players. Not all those guys. Some of those guys played terribly last year, and they still found a home, right? So
like 2 or 3 were good.
Yeah. So most Notre Dame guys are going to be able to find a home. So even from that perspective, if guys want to leave and all that, I think you have to build it out and run it like a pro team in so many ways. You really, really have to.
But see, here's the problem that I don't think they understand the financial part of it. And this is where it is. Like, I've seen people say, well, Notre Dame, if they can give 105 scholarships, they should just give 105 scholarships. And you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? If you can do that. But when you only have, what, $16-17 million on the payroll, right? And the number I've heard is Notre Dame would probably like to be around 95 scholarships. And the reason why is, look, if you give another 10 scholarships and each person, you got to give 30, 40 grand in NIL. Say it's 40 grand, just as a regular guy. I mean, that's $400,000 that you have to pay, that you're not paying to keep your star wide receiver, or you're not paying to go out and get some portal player. So I think the big issue that a lot of people haven't really thought about is, because they don't know how this clearinghouse thing is going to be with these new NIL situations. You can't promise somebody, oh, I'm going to give you $40,000, because you're going to have to justify. And how can you justify finding an NIL deal for somebody that nobody's ever heard of, and giving them $40,000? So you can't go that route either. So it becomes a numbers game where you're trying to figure out how much money are we going to have, and yeah, you hope that you can get Jeremiah Love some more money, in the secondary market, and some of Notre Dame, Jaden Greathouse, some of these other star players that Notre Dame has, to get him some secondary money. But it's just the initial number of, whether it's 16 million, 15 million, 17 million. If you have all these guys on scholarship, that extra 10 or 15 or whatever that number may be, that's a lot of money that you don't then get to spend on the rest of your guys. And so that's where, a guy like Mike Martin has to be smart and say, okay, we can't oversign, because then we have to guarantee this person $30,000, $40,000, and we may not have it because we had to pay X guy this to keep him in the program. So that's kind of the numbers thing. And I think it's tough for schools today, without any sort of verification or understanding of what's going on with this lawsuit and how it's all going to unfold, that everybody's GM and everybody's sitting around going, well, what are my numbers, and how do I go about paying for this, because I don't know the situation. So there's a lot of uncertainty heading into this, and I knew it would be. And even if you do get, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, this thing's going to be decided very, very soon. They're going to make a decision on it, and it's going to be final. No, that's not final. That's not final, because everybody's going to then sue and say, well, hey, I didn't agree to that. And this is what I've been saying all along, Jamie. You cannot negotiate a settlement for people who aren't even in the system at this point. You can't negotiate and say, okay, well, this is how it's going to work for somebody who is a freshman in high school right now, right? That person may have a better situation NIL-wise and think that they deserve more money. And then we'll go sue the NCAA or whoever, whatever this organization is going to be known as or called as. And there's just going to be a lot of lawsuits and people being frustrated with the whole situation, that even if there is a settlement, I'm not sure that whatever those numbers are will be what the numbers are when it's all said and done. I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, a lot of lawyers making a lot of money over this when it's all said and done, because I just think no matter what comes of it, you're going to get a lot of contested lawsuits and people saying, well, I didn't agree to that. You can't just suddenly force me to agree to something that I don't think is right. Your thoughts here, Jimmy?
Well, I think too, there's so much discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots in college football and the FBS, where there's going to be a lot of teams that say, well, we can't afford this, so I don't know if we can still play at this level. And there's going to be other teams that say, well, why we make more, we bring in more revenue, so why can't we pay more, right? Which is why there's going to be like, if I'm the SEC, this is why it's all going to break off, Mike, because if you're the SEC in the Big Ten and you're getting this much more revenue, of course they're going to say, well, why shouldn't we, we have this much more money, we're bringing us more, why can't we pay more to attract the best players, rather than why is the Big 12's budget the same as our budget? Why can't we have more than that? Why is our budget the same as the AAC's budget? Whatever, right? And it's just going to come down to that, where they're going to there's just going to be too much of and then it's going to come down to there's going to be a lot of under the table stuff again. It's just
Yeah.
it's just what it is. So and we haven't even gotten to the point where, I mean, really, because the players aren't really represented in this kind of thing. It's just kind of, they're just saying, okay, this is what we're giving you. I don't think there's going to be enough of a push to get like a union, a players union across the thing. But I mean, it does feel like it could get to that at some point too, because who's to say who's to say that they don't if you, especially if you are at Alabama or something, and you read that they're making this much money from this, when you say like, well, why aren't we getting more of it? Why are we only getting this small piece of the pie? Compared to like the NBA, they get like 50% of revenues goes to the players, and all of that, right? So I just think there's so much, everything that's been opened, like the box has been opened. Obviously you can't put it back in the box now, but it's just going to get worse and worse, and it's going to be a total mess for I think years.
Yeah.
And the only thing that will really kind of like make it get like kind of fix it is to break off and to have those like ones that make so much more, obviously the Notre Dames, the Big Tens, the SEC. But even then, like, I guess there is something to like, UCLA wants to have all this money from football, but if you're UCLA and you're never going to compete for a national championship, because let's be honest, at this point, you just know that certain teams, and that's UCLA, like they're like above, or like at least above a mid-tier, program in college football, but you're never going to compete. If you're Rutgers, you're never going to win a national championship. At what point do those people just say, it's just not really worth it? Why don't we just go here and then we can win and we can do this? Because it's all like, how much does that money really, really mean to you in the end? Because if it is paying for all these other sports and doing that, okay, fine. But if you are going to have to pay all that money to the players and stuff too, and that it still really isn't supporting these other sports and all these, I don't know how many of these schools are all going to be all in on it. And I just think it's going to be small, and it is going to break off into that Super League eventually.
Well, I think that teams will try to stay in it if they can, but it's going to be, I think in the end, it'll be kind of like what we see in Major League Baseball. There'll be the single A, the double A, and the triple A teams. It's going to be essentially a minor league for the NFL. And I do think that eventually the schools are going to have to make them employees. I know that the schools are trying to, get some sort of legislation passed that would say, no, we give them a special designation, but then, that's going to be up for debate as well, up for lawsuits, all those types of things. And so I think the only way to solve it is again, to make the players employees. The problem with that is if they're an employee, you can't make them then suddenly go to school. You can't, if they're football players, you can't say, okay, well, you absolutely have to go to school. So that's, of course, why Notre Dame doesn't want to do it. And rightfully so. It should be, I mean, that's what Notre Dame believes in. And it should be that way. But I think that, you can't, I don't think you can force them to do these things. And then you have like other things you have to worry about: insurance, long-term disability, all those different things that, as a business owner, do you want somebody that gets hurt on the job, right? And then they come back and sue you, because you're an employee, and they come back and they sue you and say, you know what, I didn't get trained well. Or when I got injured, you didn't do a good job of this, and you just ruined my football career and my ability to make money. That's coming, Jamie. Those days are coming, especially if they become an employee. I mean, that's going to happen. And it's interesting because I'm sure that unless you have some sort of thing in the collective bargaining agreement that the NFL and all these other players have, these other sports have, it's you're going to run into all this type of stuff, and I don't know. It's just a mess. We'll see how it all unfolds. There's so much that's up in the air right now that I just don't know how they're going to be able to solve it in a short period of time. So we may go into the season really not knowing the situation and still being the same situation. And what do you do then if you're only at 85? I'm sure that they'll figure it out and say, oh no, everybody thought we'd be at 105, so we're going to grandfather everybody in. I'm sure that's what's going to happen, but there's so much uncertainty right now. You just don't know what to expect. And as a GM, I mean, it's got to be a difficult job to have right now because you just don't know how much money you have. You don't know how many scholarships you have. You don't know how to plan for the future. So, that's one good thing about having a guy like Mike Martin. He's been around that and understands, how to make all this work. So I think Notre Dame will be in good shape. Lots of questions, Jamie, about 2027 quarterback. A lot of people are frustrated with the process that they haven't offered people. We got guys coming still. I think that they have Teddy Gerard. He's coming June 5th. He's a 2027 guy. At some point, you're going to have to pull the trigger on somebody. And as we talked about last week, I don't think you can just say, oh, yeah, we want you all to come into camp and throw for us again so then we can figure out who to – you're just not going to get anybody, or at least not many people. And the guys that you are going to get are going to be people that really want the Notre Dame offer that probably aren't your top 2 or 3 guys. And then they're going to show up and you don't offer them, they're going to get frustrated with the process. So it's a tough situation. And we were talking off air and a lot of people are saying, well, what's going on? What are they going to do? I don't think that there's anybody that's out there right now that anybody's in love with. I mean, people ask me all the time when I watch all the 2027 film of these quarterbacks. I like a lot of the guys. I just don't love them. And that's tough. And to be honest, Jamie, I don't see a big difference between a lot of them either. I don't see like this guy has a huge upside, so that's why you go with him. I just don't see really too many where I feel like there's really a huge upside. At least guys that they've visited recently and gone and taken a look at. So we'll see. Your thoughts here on that?
Yeah, I really do think the main thing is, like, after I've watched, like, specifically the guys that, have visited Notre Dame, that, Notre Dame has gone out and seen, like the guys that obviously you would consider to be their kind of primary targets. I'm not in love with any of those guys. I think every single one of them has, like you said, good things about them, but none of these guys would be like elite guys that you would consider. When people say, well, CJ Carr was committed at this time, none of these guys are in the same class as CJ Carr as a prospect. They just aren't.
Yeah, I agree.
And even the guys that are like, and this happens all the time with, recruiting, where they overrate quarterbacks because it's like they have to kind of have guys rated high in a certain year. But even the guys that are like rated really high in the class that, they aren't really like after, I think those guys are overrated too. Like, I just, to be honest, and I've seen enough of these classes where you see that quite a bit, where there's 7 guys who are, ranked in the top 100 in the composite recruiting rankings, and they wouldn't be in another year, and they shouldn't be really in that year. It's just that they're quarterbacks. So this guy's the 6th best guy, so he's got to be here or whatever. And it's like, well, no, like it could be. So I really think too that there's a lot of these ones where, like Peyton Houston, for example, is a guy that I think if you watch his film, you're like, wow, he's like really exciting, and he's got like, you know, really like dual threat ability, and you see some like really like big time plays and all that, and like some kind of like magical improvisation thing. He's got 8.5-inch hands.
Yeah.
Those are like, that
He's
is
small.
it is like tiny hands. Like no one in the NFL has hands that size. Like, and if you compare him to, you know, it's not about being sub 6 foot, because there are guys obviously who are in the NFL who are sub 6 foot. But if you look at like Bryce Young and Kyler Murray, those guys, their hands are like, you know, an inch bigger than him, which does make a difference. Especially if you're playing in a place like Notre Dame where the weather isn't that great, you know, and you have to be able to grip the ball at a certain. So there's a lot of things like that where I just don't know if there's guys who do a lot of good things, but nobody who wows you in any single way. So I just really think that's kind of the thing, is that maybe they're just kind of waiting to kind of, I don't know if they're waiting to be wowed, because I don't think they are going to be
It's not
wowed.
going to happen. Yeah.
But I think they're just kind of waiting to see like which guys that they're going to kind of settle on, and these will be the main focus. And I really think too that it's a product of the system in terms of recruiting and how everything is that so much of it has to be done like really like after a guy's freshman season, and you're just really pushing into that and getting guys, you know, while they're going through their sophomore season, their start of their sophomore season, and these guys already have these big time offers. Some of these guys have barely played, right? Some of these guys have barely played, and you just don't know how they're going to be. And I look at specifically guys like CJ Stroud and Jackson Dart, who were first round picks and, you know, really, really good player. Like CJ Stroud was an amazing player in college. And obviously he's a good player in the NFL now. He was like very under the radar until the Elite 11 heading into his senior year. And at that time, like Baylor thought they were going to get him. So he ended up at Ohio State because he ended up just going and tearing it up at, you know, an Elite 11. So I don't even think it's a bad thing for them to watch as these guys are like rising juniors, to make sure, hey, we're going to watch every single Elite 11, you know, camp that we're going to see that these guys do. We're going to watch every little thing that they do going up, and then we're going to decide. And yes, it's not ideal to get into a situation where you're like behind with some of these guys in terms of relationships and all that. But do you really want to take somebody just to take somebody, and then you got to drop him later, or, you know, because that's, I think, what they'd be looking at if they took somebody too soon. So, I mean, there's obviously pros and cons to both sides, but I just really don't think it's a great quarterback here.
The interesting thing, and look, I you know, we've talked about this on this show, and I don't want to be a guy that sits here and bashes people, because that's not what about. But look, I mean, Notre Dame's quarterback in 2026 isn't an Elite 11 guy. He didn't get invited to the Elite 11, so that's why it's important, you know. And I'm not saying that Noah Grubbs can't be a good quarterback, but you know, there are a lot of guys that Notre Dame has recruited that did not do well at Notre Dame that were Elite 11 guys, you know. So, you know, it's a tough position to be in. And so, are you concerned? You know, I don't know. You know, I see Sonny D is mentioned here, and I think it makes sense in some situations where he's saying, I assume it's a he, sorry if you are a female, I apologize, but I assume he is saying that, you know, why make a decision if you're not sold on it? And that's kind of what you just said too. But you don't want to get in a position where you get nobody. And I think what has hurt them more than anything is that their last couple quarterback guys that they got are not sure things. You know, there's no sure thing there with Ebert. There's no sure thing there with Grubbs at this point. And so you'd be taking yet another guy that there's no sure thing for. I don't think there's a sure thing in any quarterback, but there are certainly guys that you feel better about and have a high ceiling or whatever, have shown it. You mentioned Peyton, and I watched a kid, and I think the guy, first of all, you're right. He makes all these amazing kind of plays, but he's doing that against high school players, right? People watch his film and they think, oh, well, he kind of plays like Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, well, you float a few of those balls up there in the NFL or in college, they're getting picked off. I'm sorry. A lot of those throws that he made are just flat getting picked off. They look good on film, but they're going to get picked off in the college game. And so it's fun to watch them, and it's fun to watch some of these guys and say, oh, wow, that guy makes a lot of plays. And I would rather take a guy who makes plays than somebody who looks perfect and just doesn't make a lot of plays. But at the same time, you got to be smart with the football. And a lot of the decisions that he made in a lot of his film, you're sitting there, you're saying, okay, well, that worked out for you, and that's good, but that's not going to work out at the next level. It definitely is not going to work out at the next level. You're also 5'10". You got small hands. Notre Dame has got 6'8" guys on the offensive line. Yeah, it works when you're playing with a bunch of 6'3" guys in Louisiana, but it's something completely different when you're playing with a bunch of 6'8" guys. And not only the 6'8" guys, but you're also playing with a bunch of 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" guys on the defensive side of the ball coming at you as well that can knock down your passes. So there are a lot of things that you have to kind of factor into this. And so I don't know what the answer is going to be in 2027 quarterback. I just think that Notre Dame's not in a good position because of what's happened in the last two situations at the quarterback position. And I'm not criticizing Ebert. I think he's got some upside. He's got a lot of upside if he can develop in things. But again, as we were watching in the spring game, just not very accurate at all, and looks a long way to go. I've been doing this for a long time. When I see quarterbacks who throw like that as a freshman, very, 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 very rarely. I can't even think of anybody that suddenly got better and developed into a starter. I just can't think of anybody in the 25 years that I've been watching Notre Dame freshman quarterbacks show up for practice and throw. And that doesn't mean that he won't be the guy. He certainly can be the guy. I just haven't seen it. And then, of course, with Grubbs, it's who knows what the situation was. But again, Notre Dame was not in a good situation with the 2016 or 2026 class. There just wasn't a lot of guys who were that interested. And they took the guy that they felt was probably the best guy for what they have. And now we'll have to see. But it's just unfortunate that the 2027 class is not full of those types of guys. So I kind of see where Sonny D is coming from in that, it may be smart just to wait. We've seen guys kind of emerge. Kenny Minchie was not a real hot prospect, right? At the same time, in when he was being recruited, and then suddenly developed into this guy that you're like, wow, this is a lot of upside. There's going to be a guy like Kenny Minchie in 2027 that nobody knows about right now. Not that they don't know about, but, just isn't quite the guy. And as you mentioned, Stroud, there's going to be a guy like that. There's probably going to be 10 guys like that. So what I wouldn't do if I'm Notre Dame is I wouldn't just take a guy just to take a guy, right? I would be smart about it. I think they're being smart about it. Unfortunately, I think the fans are upset because they want a quarterback, and they're like, well, heck, we just went to the national championship game. Why does nobody want to play here? And we keep going back to the same old stuff that we talk about every year, everything, Jamie. Who was the last great Notre Dame quarterback in the NFL? Who was the last great wide receiver? Who's the great wide receiver on Notre Dame's roster right now? And if you don't have that, then why should a top quarterback come if he doesn't have a lot of great receivers and nobody's been developed there to be an NFL player? Conversely, same situation. Why should a wide receiver go if you don't have a lot of great wide quarterbacks? That's why you're having this problem. And I don't know the answer. We'll just have to see what happens. So, I just think the fans are impatient. I understand why. But I just don't think that there's a lot of good options. And I think that Notre Dame fans feel like, well, there should be some good options. But the players are what they are. It's kind of like offensive line a couple of years ago where we're like, well, there's just nobody really good. There just really wasn't many good offensive linemen a couple of years ago, and you got to take what you have, the opportunity to take. So, all right. We're going to get into some questions from IST customers. Also, if you're in the chat and you have some questions, we got some guys there in the chat. If you have questions you can ask, we're going to get to those too. First one, who do you see being the next commit? Hard to say. It really is hard to say. There's a lot of guys coming on visits. It's going to be interesting to see. We've heard that Alistair Vallejo may come on an unofficial visit. If he does, and likes it, that's a possibility, I suppose. We'll have to see how it all unfolds, but I don't know. Until somebody comes and visits, it's hard to say. You have some, 26 guys coming up as far as, on June 10th, Ian Premer and Ely are supposed to come, but I think that they're trying to rearrange some of those midweek visits. So we're just not sure. I don't know. I don't see anybody. Anybody you think that you could point out is probably the next guy?
No, not as an obvious, because I think a lot of the guys, that we know when they're going to do it, have announced that they're going to do it in July, like after they take a bunch of officials, right? So, so I think you're looking at, there isn't anyone on the horizon in terms of, June that you would say, hey, this guy's deciding and we think Notre Dame leads right now and whatever, because the guys that have announced of when they're going to decide, those guys they're going through that process and they're going to make that decision after. So, I don't think there is anyone that's like an obvious one, and that's just how it is right now.
Yeah. All right, Chris, ND92 says, do you expect a typical quarterback recruiting cycle for 2027 just postponed somewhat, or might we see a quarterback commit out of the blue without first reporting an offer? Could it be ND only wants to offer a kid that's ready to commit on the spot? I don't know if that's it, but, I think what's going to happen is they're going to have to make a decision. We'll see what happens with that. As I mentioned, Teddy Gerard is a guy that's coming up June 5th on an unofficial. I watched his film. I like him. I think he's a good solid player.
Him.
Yeah, I mean, I like him as
out
much
of the
as
guys. I like him the most out of the guys that they're after. I mean, there's things that I want to see from him going forward, but I like him as a prospect. Like I think that he has. Some of the things that I've seen from him, I feel really, really good about. And to me, I would say that he is, like a more athletic, Steve Angeli is the kind of how I would put it. So he's got a little bit more, escapability, little bit more, dynamic ability as a runner. And I just want to see kind of stuff with his arm progress. But I liked him quite a bit. I think he's not blowing anyone away. But to me, if I was going to think of all the guys that they were going to offer, as long as the mental stuff checks out, or they like him that way, I think that would be a guy that people should be happy if they offer.
I agree, and it almost seems like he's coming up. And if all things, look good, he could be the guy who gets the offer. You just don't know. It just seems weird. I don't want to say weird, but it seems like this late in the game that they have they're probably narrowing it down a little bit. You know what I mean? To where there's probably 3 or 4 kids they're considering. They want to bring this guy in and see what they think of him as well and what he thinks of Notre Dame. And it could be, could end up being an offer. And again, I agree with you. I think he's, if he's not my top guy, he's certainly one B. There's no doubt. I mean, I think he is somebody that I think is definitely a guy that I think could play at Notre Dame. And I don't see anybody that I look at and say, yeah, I think Notre Dame should definitely go after this guy, other than him. I really don't see that at all. All right. Way too early score predictions for Miami and A&M, and very short summary of why. Looking at both these teams as they are now before fall camp, I have some thoughts on this, but what do you think, Jamie?
I think Notre Dame will win by 10 points against Miami. I think if the game was at home, I'd probably pick them by like 17. I think Miami's got a lot of questions. I think if Miami was playing Notre Dame maybe like a month into the season, they'd probably be in a much better spot. And I think that it could be a closer game. But I just think that as much as even though it's going to be a tough thing for Notre Dame to have a new quarterback in that position, I just think they're going to be running the ball enough to make that guy comfortable. To not force him to win the game. Like he just has to play smart in that game and make some plays, definitely, move the chains, but it's not going to be all on his shoulders. And then I think with the A&M, I think A&M, they're so, it's weird because I think they're a real enigma because I think they've got a ton of guys coming back on both sides of the ball, and the O-line is all back, and that's always a good thing, right? If you get the whole O-line back, and then obviously Le'Veon Moss, if he's healthy, if he's coming back from the ACL and he's healthy, he's a really good back. And they're going to run the ball. They're going to try to run the ball and dictate it that way. But I think they got some real questions. Like Marcel Reed has got some real questions as a passer. They got some real questions at receiver. Their secondary sucked last year, was not very good. They do have a lot of guys back, but some of those guys I just think maybe they're not that good. So even though they brought in some help, so I think they're going to be like a solid team, but I think that's a game that Notre Dame's going to win. It'll be close for some of it, but Notre Dame will pull away and win by 2 touchdowns. Yes, I know this sounds like so overconfident because those are like the 2 best teams Notre Dame's supposed to play this year. But I really just think Notre Dame is kind of built better than both those teams to win those early games.
I think that's it. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think Notre Dame is going to be ready to play as a team and more towards 100% of what they can be than what Miami and A&M will be at that particular time. And so I think Notre Dame will win the Miami game probably by 14 points. I think they're going to do that by running the ball and not making their quarterback have to make a ton of plays. But I do think that the quarterback will make some plays because I think Miami's secondary, even though they're bringing in a bunch of guys, it's still kind of up in the air. I think the big thing for Notre Dame is, can they shut down Miami's running game? And if they can shut down Miami's running game, and Miami has some good players coming back at offensive line too. They just do. And they were able to run the ball last year, Jamie. They were a good running team. So if Notre Dame can shut down their running game, Notre Dame will easily control that game. But if they can't, then this thing could be a little bit closer than people think. But I think Notre Dame will play smart. I think that they'll do what they need to do and play well. With the A&M game, the thing that scares me again in that A&M game is their offensive line. It's a good offensive line. And Notre Dame was pretty healthy last year and still kind of struggled a little bit, against that offensive line at times. And so I think that when you add a running quarterback to that mix, they're going to do a lot of different things to try and confuse Notre Dame. And I think if there's one area that Notre Dame could be suspect at least a little bit early would be in the running game on defense. So I think in the end, Notre Dame will probably win by 10-14, but I agree with you. It could be closer than people think. And we'll see what happens. All right. Let's see. Oh, okay. Greg put this up here. Mike, what happened with Diabell? Did they just not like him as much as Grubbs, or do you think that there was a fear of not being able to actually sign him after the Deuce fiasco? Um, well, he wasn't that high. He wasn't the prospect that Deuce was, when Notre Dame was going after Grubbs. He just wasn't. He became that later, but um, I just, I think here's what I think that happened. I think Notre Dame looked at the situation and said, Deuce is a very high ceiling guy, um, but he also has some bust potential. He has to develop, and I think he did his last year, became a better passer, more accurate, and that's what they were hoping for. But they didn't know that at the time how well he would develop. And so I think that they took a guy like Noah Grubbs because was considered more of a high floor guy. So you're protecting the bust potential in Deuce with getting a high floor guy. And I think what happened is you didn't get the high ceiling guy in Deuce, and that kind of sucks. And then I would say that the high floor guy that you got in Noah Grubbs just hasn't quite developed as much as I think you and I had hoped, Jamie. I was hoping to see a little bit more than what I've seen. I'm sure Notre Dame is probably feeling that way as well. But there's a whole season to play. But one thing I will say is if you look at the way that they played in the spring game, I'm not sure, that offensive line was a disaster. So I don't know how much better he's going to get or certainly look if they don't fix that offensive line situation. So that would be my thoughts on the Diabell thing. Your thoughts, Jamie? And I think with Diabell, he was a lot like Deuce in that there's a lot of upside, but there's also a risk that he could be a bust too, and you don't want to take two guys with a bust, factor. Your thoughts here, Jamie?
Yeah, I think how you put it in terms of like the high floor part, because there was a thought because Grubbs, I mean, started as a freshman in high school, played a sophomore. Like he's going to have his 10,000 hours of like being a quarterback way before he steps on campus. And, typically that's a very good thing to have that. And one of the things with Diabell is he had to kind of wait his turn, and there was like less film, was more projection on him. I mean, I'll say whatever. I'm not going to just to toot my own horn, but I mean, it's on record. You can find it's stuff on ISD. I liked him a lot, and I really liked him. I remember seeing him when he was a freshman, before he was a freshman, going into at like the quarterback camp, and I was like, this guy's got something. Like there was, he was talented. Like the ball just came out of his hand well, and I think that was largely it. There was more projection with Bell. Maybe that's why they didn't go after him. But I don't think there's anything like in terms of like Deuce fiasco, in terms of like, there's nothing with Bell that indicated that this guy was going to be like, well, maybe he's looking for the bag, or he's looking for, he might not stick or anything like that. No, like he is a very like just low-key kid, and it's just one of those things. Like I hope that this doesn't happen. I think most people hope that doesn't happen, but he very much is one of those guys that if he does really well, people say, oh man, he was a Notre Dame kid, why did he end up at Notre Dame? Like because he really is a Notre Dame type of kid. Like so we'll see what happens. Hopefully Grubbs has a good senior year.
If I'm Notre Dame, I'm revisiting that. And that's just me. I'm just revisiting that.
I would if I was them, but I don't know.
It's not my decision. Yeah, it's not. And I think sometimes too, there was a tough situation there in that Gino had been at Notre Dame longer than Mike Denbrock, right? And when you come in as the offensive coordinator, even though Gino and Mike had worked together a lot and, kind of knew each other and everything, you don't want to just come in and throw your weight around as an offensive coordinator and say, well, you know what? I don't like your guy at quarterback that you like. You know what I mean? let's try and make a decision together. If you're going to work together, you have to try and make sure that you're on the same page and that type of thing. And so if say Denbrock, because he likes those types of quarterbacks, a Diabell type of quarterback, if he had come in and said, well, I think we should take Bell, and Gino's like, well, no, I think we should take Clark, or I mean Grubbs, and here's why, and blah blah blah. You don't want to start your relationship over again
Yeah.
with a big mess like that. So again, please don't read into that. I'm not saying that's what happened. I could see that could be an issue. I don't know that for a fact. And I'm not suggesting that I've heard that either. I'm just saying that could very well have been one of the issues that begin with. And because of the boom bust situation with Deuce and Grubbs, I get I get why that decision was made. And it is what it is. But if I'm them, I'm revisiting it. I just am. I am. I'm making phone calls. I just am. That's just me.
And just to kind of add to it, because I think that's a great point, Mike, because I think that it very well could have been. We don't know that's the case. We're not reporting it, but it very well could have been the case, because that kind of stuff does happen all the time, where there's big disagreements about like, no, we're getting this guy, or we got to go this guy. Right. And obviously that's something that now I think part of that is the GM is taking a bigger role into that. And obviously too, there's Chad plays a role in that too. So like if Chad and Gino are like, this is our guy, and then Denbrock comes in. So there's all of that. Right. And so there's a lot that can go into it in terms of like when you're coming into it later, unless there's just something someone just has so much conviction on, it's harder to come in and do that, where maybe for the next year, I guarantee you Denbrock has much greater say in the 2027 process than he had in the 2026 process.
Oh, I guarantee you. And I would guess that if he isn't happy with the way that things worked out, as far as 2026 or whatever, or even 2027, he's going to say something about it.
Oh yeah.
He's going to, because it's, it's ultimately his butt. And of course the quarterback coach, it's his butt too, but it eventually you have to call the plays with that guy. And let's be honest, Gino was out visiting all these quarterbacks. Denbrock was still at LSU. You know what I mean? He wasn't at Notre Dame yet to go actually visit a lot of these quarterbacks and get to know them as well as Gino had, because they'd been on campus and they'd been there for invasion throwing. They'd been there, for games. And so he had a better understanding of who the guys were and what they understand. And so a lot of that, Denbrock just didn't know these guys as well as Gino did. So, all right. Another question here. It's been said that ND has stepped up its NIL efforts significantly on several occasions when discussing a recruit. The comment's been made that ND will not lose this battle due to NIL. Has ND stepped up enough to be competitive for a top 5 quarterback, or is that still down a different aisle? Well, I think it's a situation that if you have the opportunity to sign a top 5 quarterback, you're going to do what you have to do. All right. That's still the biggest position in football. It's still the most important position in football, not just at the NFL level, but at the college level as well. It's not as big, I think, as the NFL record or the NFL situation, but it certainly is very big. And if you can get a special guy, they can make all the difference in the world as far as, whether you win a national championship or don't. So I think that they will certainly go after and spend money on a top guy if they firmly believe in him. I absolutely believe they'd do that. But, which top guy is that's been interested so far? Just hasn't been, other than Deuce Knight. And they would have paid whatever they had to, I think, to keep him. But, at some point that kid just wanted to leave. He just didn't want to be in the class. All right. Why has 2026 tight end recruiting been a challenge? It's a good question. I think that, Notre Dame was tight end U, but if you look at what they did last year in the tight end situation, the numbers just aren't there. They don't reflect that. If you look at what Denbrock did in LSU and what he did in Cincinnati, you know, there aren't the Michael Mayer numbers. They're not the the numbers that we're used to seeing as far as receptions, touchdowns, yards. It's not what it was. But I think it's not what it was because they haven't had a healthy tight end that has that ability to do that. That's why they haven't thrown to the tight end as much. They just haven't had a guy that was 100% healthy that could be the vertical threat that they were looking for. I think that changes this year with Eli Raridan. I think we'll see that more. But I think that when you have to look at recent history of what Denbrock's done with his offense at LSU, at Cincinnati, and the first year at Notre Dame, you don't see the kind of numbers that he had been putting up the first time he was at Notre Dame, with some of the tight ends, or when he was coaching the tight ends at Notre Dame, and guys like John Carlson and players like that really developed into great players. You just don't see that number, and again, I think that's because Notre Dame is trying to adjust their offense to more of a modern type of style, and they need to start hitting big plays. I don't know if you guys saw, and Jamie, I don't know if you saw my story that I wrote last week about big plays in a national championship game. And I went and I looked at all the big plays that happened last year's game and really for the last 7 years and how much that impacted the game. And it's amazing how Notre Dame could do absolutely nothing on offense until they started hitting Jaden Greathouse for 30 yards. 35 yards. As soon as they started doing that, then all of a sudden the offense opens up and Notre Dame looks like they can move the football. Until they did that, they looked ridiculous. They looked like they didn't even belong in the game. That's why it is so important to get these wide receivers. That's why it's so important to get the quarterback. If you can push the ball downfield, things happen. And if you go back and you read that story, literally every single drive that I focused on started, or there was some big play in there that's why the drive got going and they ended up scoring a touchdown. If you go back and read it, it's amazing when you sit and read that and say, wow, that's what we got to fix then. And I think that's what you're seeing with Denbrock and what he's trying to do. I think he realized that playing with Jaden Daniels and Ritter made some big plays and could put the ball downfield, and how much that made the offense more explosive. Your thoughts here on this, Jimmy?
Well, yeah, you got to be being more explosive is critical, obviously, and that's why adding that at the receiver position is critical. I don't know, but like tight end, it's just it might just be that it's that kind of year. I think usually they're in on, they get the tight ends like so early. Those are like the first guys in the class. And I don't know what it was, but they've usually been able to get those guys at camp, and those guys like commit like then.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, because the previous years, the previous summer, I mean, it seemed like they got just a ton of guys that were camp guys that ended up like committing or whatever. But if you look at last year's camp, and I don't know how you put it on, but I mean, some of it you put on Chad Bowden and the personnel staff. It's like they didn't have those guys and they didn't get, so like Ian Premer should have been on camp last year. Like that's the kind of thing that they did before. They get those guys, and then it's just once you get those guys on campus, you coach them, you see them, you show them everything about it, because it's easy to say, well, Notre Dame's tight end you. Well, they get those kids on campus and then they show them. They're like, here's the list of all these guys or whatever, right? Like, it's a lot easier to do when you're there, but they just didn't get those guys at campus. I think that's the main thing, is like for forever, it seemed like for the last decade, they always seem to get those guys, whether it's one or two guys, they get these guys at the camp. Sometimes they get two guys from the same camp who commit, that end up being like super high profile guys. And they just didn't really get those guys on campus last year, or even like last summer. There was like, and I think that's part of it too. Where I don't know if whatever. Like I said, I don't want to blame Chad Bowden for this, but it was like they didn't really seem to be set up that well for 2026 when all this when it was like so yeah, they're doing well now and they're catching up and they're getting guys on campus, they're hitting home runs, whatever. But they weren't getting guys on campus in the fall or in the
even
summer.
Even games.
Yes, they weren't getting.
I would sit there and I would say, "This is the list. This is the guys."
Yeah.
And then they would say, I would hear, well, yeah, they don't want to bring guys on campus because if they don't spend a lot of time, it's like, who the hell? Just tell the kids, look, we want you to come check out a game. That's it. We don't have time to sit and talk to you, but just come check out a game. Look, Ohio State and Michigan they're under the same situation that Notre Dame is. They bring in 70 guys every game, and Notre Dame's bringing in like 4. It's like, what is going on here?
Well, that's also what the recruiting staff is for. The on-campus recruiting staff is to host those guys, to spend all that time there, because Marcus Freeman and the position coach don't have the time to do it. And
you're bringing up, and
they just did a poor job of it last year. It's just
I agree 100%. 100%. I kept sitting there going, there's 4 guys coming. What? How? I mean, Florida State, you're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
It's like, why are you not bringing in a ton of guys? I just didn't understand.
If the season wasn't going as well as it did on the field, and obviously went really well, then that would have been the number one topic we talked about in the off season. So because the season went well, you can preach patience and say, okay, let's see when they get all this kind of stuff. But it also kind of says like, hey, maybe Chad was already looking to get out back then too, because it's, I don't know. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. Like and that was something I know that we talked about, offline.
Right. Yes.
We talked about this a lot and we were concerned. I
was getting mad. Yes,
so
I was. Absolutely.
I think if I was going to say, like why? Because it is weird because everything usually goes in a certain way, especially with tight end. And I think that is 100% why. Because they always had get guys before and they just didn't last year.
The other thing too to take into consideration, I think Notre Dame is addressing this now, is that when let's say you get done with your regular season, right? If you're a coach and you're not in the playoff, you're thinking, okay, we got to play Oregon State, right? And they're not quite as good as we are. We're going to learn about them. We're going to do everything we can, but we also need to get on the road and go out and recruit all these guys, right? And we got to go out and meet the new 2027 tight ends, and we got to get out there and get our face in front of them, and so they know who it is and all this type of stuff. But when you're Notre Dame and you're in the playoff and you think, oh, well, we got Indiana. We can beat Indiana. Well, then we got Georgia. Well, we better start looking at Georgia too, just in case we got to play Georgia. Oh, by the way, we probably ought to look at everybody. And so then everybody that's there is doing 10 times the work that you normally would do for just one opponent. And then you continue to win and you can't go out on the road because you're like, I got to figure out how to beat Georgia. I got to figure out how to beat Penn State. I got to figure out how to beat Ohio State. I can't get out on the road. So Notre Dame was sending out all these random dudes, and you got Chad, leaving, and Notre Dame has nobody out on the recruiting trail because there's nobody there. And you're all sitting there going, well, what is going on here? And so I think Notre Dame is addressing that now, and we're seeing that where a lot of these kind of GAs, guys that are kind of up-and-coming young coaches, they're sending them out there because they're anticipating that guy's probably going to be out there in December and January again because we're going to make another run. And, so we got to get that guy used to it. We got to get that guy used to knowing these coaches. We got to get him used to knowing the players that he's going to be recruiting. And so I got to give Marcus credit. I think he's smart in that. I remember when this first started happening, And I was like, why would you send all these guys out on the road? And I was talking to Matt. Matt was saying, yeah, well, this is kind of what they're thinking. And I said, oh, well, I guess. I don't know. But he said, they want to be more aggressive and, some of these young coaches and help them. And I said, well, I guess that makes sense. But then when you start thinking about it after I did, I said, well, yeah, these coaches won't be out on the road in December and January. If you're in the playoff and you continue to win, you won't be out there at all. And Den Brock wasn't out there at all until the very end of January for a week, and there's just not much you can do in that situation. So I think that also factors into it. All right, we got one more question. How did Notre Dame not know Pat Garity was a disaster for the Detroit Pistons for 4 years? And I'm not. I know a lot of people have questioned the Pat Garity hire, whether it's a good hire, bad hire. I just don't think anybody knows at this point. And I would be more concerned about, does it make sense to have a general manager doing both women's and men's basketball? There's not as much as there is in Notre Dame football. There's not nearly as many players and this and that, and nearly as many contracts to negotiate because there's just not as many members. So maybe that makes sense. But do you relate, how much of the personal, that type of thing? I don't know the answer to that. I don't even begin to know much about it. So I don't think that I'm qualified to really make a comment on that. I do understand why people would be a little bit concerned, but I don't think that anybody knows enough about it at this point to really make any sort of educated kind of comment or yes, this is a good idea, or no, it's not. Your thoughts here, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, also, he wasn't the general manager of the Pistons. He was, he was an assistant general manager. So no one really knows like how much say he had in saying like, oh, we got to pick this guy or this is that or whatever. Like, I've never seen any reporting saying like, oh, Pat Garity was terrible at his job with the Pistons or whatever. Like he was one of the problems or whatever. Like sometimes too, on those terrible, like people look at, I remember the Cleveland Browns, Bill Belichick. Oh gosh, everybody got fired. Then everybody became like head coaches, and Nick Saban was this. Like sometimes you just don't know. So I think you kind of have to, wait and see. It might not mean anything, right? That he was there at that time, but I really don't know about like like you said, the doing it for both teams, what exactly that role entails, because we don't cover college basketball in the same way that we cover college football. And then even with college football, stuff changes all the time in terms of what the general manager does. And you look at, there's like so many of these schools, some schools like have what Notre Dame is doing, and they're like building an NFL model and they're mixing it with recruiting and they're doing all this. And then there's other schools that are just like, well, it's like a ceremonial guy that he's coming in, who's like, just, some guy who's an alum, whatever. And then he's going to be the guy. And you don't really know like about what that person does on a day-to-day for some of these other schools. So I think it's so new that we just don't know. And how much that's going to play into all of it in terms of like, Pat Garity, like recruiting, like, a women's basketball player to be in there, or like dealing with NIL there and all that. I think it's just wait and see. Hey, if it goes bad, I think people can, look at it and point in a certain direction, but also too, you can't even if it goes bad right now in like the next couple of years, are things trending good with Micah Shrewsbury and the Notre Dame basketball program right now? Is that Pat Garity's fault? He's kind of walking into a situation here. And obviously too, there's walking into a situation with Niall Ivey and what's going on with Notre Dame women's hoops. Like, I mean, last year couldn't have, for all the expectation, it couldn't have gone much worse for how it ended. So I don't know how much is to blame if things go bad there too. So it's just one of these things that I think people should just wait and kind of see. what happens, and go from there.
As I've been trying to tell people, I think a lot of people look at today's college sports and they say, okay, well, if Notre Dame is aggressive and big heavily on NIL about football, that means that they should do it in men's basketball, women's basketball, lacrosse, baseball, soccer, softball. Folks, that's not going to happen. There's only so much money. So you have to focus on what can give you the biggest bang for the buck, and that's going to be football. And so I think a lot of people who expect Notre Dame to be 100% committed to men's basketball, like a St. John's or even a Kansas or a North Carolina, they're going to be disappointed. And I think even in the same situation with women's basketball, I think Notre Dame's going to certainly be competitive and do what they can, but I don't think it's going to be the priority that everybody thinks it could or should be, because you have to focus so much of your money and attention on football, because let's be honest, that's what builds buildings. That's where they get their money, is when you have a good football program. Notre Dame has money. When they don't, they don't. And you got to be smart about it. And I think that what you're going to see is Notre Dame's going to focus heavily priority-wise on football, as it should be. And that will hopefully bring, a lot more revenue to the other sports, and they can help build things. You mentioned the Garity going out and recruiting female athletes. You don't need Garity to do that if you have somebody who's kind of like the Chad Bowden of women's basketball, right? Somebody who comes in there and that's really the recruiting guy. This Pat Garity is just there to negotiate, contracts. And
that's what I meant. It's more of him kind of doing with that part,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah,
I don't think
I think that's where he's going to be. Yeah, but I think a lot of people think of a general manager and think that they're going to be heavily involved in. I think Mike Martin is, because he's good at it, right? And he can talk the game and he knows the situation. So they're going to put him out there. They're going to put him out there, and it's just kind of like you put your best foot forward. And so we'll see how it all unfolds and what makes the most sense in the end. But I just don't think we're really qualified to make really any sort of good, comments about that situation. We just don't know enough about it. All right. Thanks, folks. That's going to be it for the show. We will be back next week. Some visits will be coming up, so we'll be able to talk about that. Happy Memorial Day for everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. And we will talk to you next week on Power Hour.